again, that's high context versus low context. So when we look at someone expressing an opinion in a low context way, you're writing for me a reflection paper. What do? You just say it straight. Whereas a high context means of expressing opinion wanders all over. So it's interesting, if you're from a high context setting and your education was higher in context, you're not used to the idea of a 3-sentence paragraph where you say what you're going to say, you say it, and then you remind people what you were going to say. The skills we learn in North American educational institutions in the elementary level are built on low context framing of how to express things rather than high context. And one of our students was a Chinese major in China, and then he switched over to being an English major, and I asked him how his Chinese was. Now, his Chinese spoken language is perfect. I mean, he's a native speaker. That's who he is. But he said, I can't write in Chinese anymore because I've lost that skill, because there's a certain skill to writing Chinese well. And once I stopped practicing it, it dropped out. And you can see from the diagram, if high context communication is the methodology, it's not just random meandering, but it's talking around a point and around a point. In Kenya, I learned that sermons, 3 points, doesn't matter. Start with the same letter, doesn't matter. What matters is the stories that accompany them. And some have called this daisy wheel logic. You start with a central point or idea, and the longer I was in Kenya, here's how I preached. I found in a pericope, in a paragraph or in a passage, a single central point. Then I would tell a story about it and come back to the point. Tell another story and come back to the point. Tell another story and come back to the point. Some call this daisy wheel logic because you can paint a daisy out of the petals going around them. And the idea behind that was there's a central point, but if I'm really communicating well, I don't even tell them what the central point is. Because by the time they've left, the stories have reinforced the central point. I just finished probably one of the last sermons I gave while I was there, and one of the parishioners came up to me and said, I'm going to remember that sermon the rest of my life now. He said, if you had given me 3 points like most Americans do, I would have forgotten it before I left the church. Because you preach like an African. And I thought, okay, well, that's a wonderful illustration of more of a high context setting. I didn't feel I was communicating as clearly because it didn't say the point straight out. Instead, I went around and around and around. And you can see why low context communicators have trouble understanding high context communicators, because we're looking for the main point. We have wonderful sayings in English: don't beat around the bush. Get it straight from the horse's mouth. Those are idioms that we use that express this idea. I want to say it straight, another way of saying things, rather than beating around the bush. Handling problems. So the direct communication, or I should say, the direct communication preference in handling problems is to simply walk right through them. That's the preference. We don't all do that, but we idealize how do you handle problems? You tackle them. Indirect communication, on the other hand, you learn how to walk around the problems. It doesn't mean you ignore them, but it means at least verbally you don't deal with them directly. The challenge is when I look at how a person perceives something, so indirect communicators can perceive direct communicators as bears going straight through. Sometimes Africans would say to me, when Americans ask me questions, it's like they're sticking knives into me, because our questions were so direct. How do we do that then? He said, well, we like to make statements and see how people respond to them. So instead of asking me a question about something, you make a statement. And if I respond, then it's an open door to conversation. If I don't respond, then find a different topic to talk about. That was hard. That was hard to learn how to do. How do direct communicators perceive indirect communication? They feel that the indirect communicators are chickens, because they never say it straight. They never go directly into it. So you can see on a multicultural team, if someone grew up as a Thai and they're used to indirect communication, and you grew up as an American, a white suburban male American like me, and you're used to direct communication, what a challenge it would be the first time you need to lovingly confront your Thai coworker. There's no such thing among the Thai. to lovingly confront. Instead, you need to use a mediator. You need to use a back door. You need to communicate indirectly. If you talk directly to the problem, you're making them lose so much face you might lose a colleague, or you might make an enemy of that colleague. Okay, I'm going to walk through this because this is the same thing. Now, when I look again at high context and low context, if you're unhappy in a low context, your face is expected to show it. If you're unhappy in a high context, your face is not expected to show it. We have sayings in English, the inscrutable, and usually we add the word Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Asian or something like that. Because Asians are trained, typically, you don't express what's going on the inside until you're in a safe place. That safe place might not be with the stranger. It might be with the stranger. Here's a good example of high context communication. Dad, school is really great. I'm making lots of friends and studying very hard with all my stuff. I simply can't think of anything I need. So if you would like, you can just send me a card, as I would love to hear from you. Love, your son. What is the son actually asking for? Money. And how does the dad respond? In a very wonderful high context way. I know that astronomy, economics, oceanography are enough to keep even an honor student busy. Do not forget the pursuit of knowledge is a noble task and you can never study enough.
I gotta learn how to write like that.
Now, proverbs of indirect communication. A Yiddish proverb, a wise person is one who hears one word and understands two. One of my favorite from the Akan and Ghana, an elder is like a bathtub. And I'm sure you know exactly what that means. No, you don't. You know, when I get into a bathtub, it doesn't tell me what it saw in my wife when she was in the tub an hour before. It keeps secrets. And I can be completely exposed, so to speak, in the bathtub, but it doesn't communicate my exposure to the next person who comes along. In Cambodia, two taboos. One is wrestling with a monk. The other is touching someone of higher status than you on the head. So the Cambodian proverb, if you're wrestling with a monk, why be afraid of touching his head? You've already blown it. So it doesn't matter. You just go a little bit further. A horse release can be caught, but a word release can never be caught. So that teaches you to be quiet in Mongolia. In Vietnam, before you tell people your favorite food, you better look at the pots and pans, see what they're cooking in the kitchen. Because if you say my favorite is spaghetti and they're making squash, you've just left them in an awkward position because they're not being good hosts for you. Proverbs are wonderful vehicles of high context communication. So is poetry. The Psalms are high context communication. The best poetry captures emotions and feelings through use of words, but it's using words in a way that bring about illusions, that remind us of something else, that bring up parallels, that help us come to grips with a picture of reality that otherwise we wouldn't be able to have. So we don't just context verbally, we also context visually. Here you see 3 light bulbs. It's clear they're of the same size to you until I put them in a context. And now to your eyes, even though I didn't change the light bulbs at all, it appears that the one at the top is far and away larger than the one at the bottom, simply because I've added the context to that. So if I add context to it, it changes things for you, and this is what communication does for us. Another form of visual contexting, you can see the 2 blue lines, and if I ask you which one is longer, for those of you who don't trust me, you will say, this is a trick question, isn't it? It is, but to your eyes, which one is longer? It's the one that looks to you to be further away. And of course, I am a tricky person, so I just show you that the 2 lines are identical in length, even though your eyes told you there's no way that those 2 lines are identical in length, and yet they are. Again, we context things. More recent, this is a classic example used often in intercultural communication textbooks. Let me ask, how many of you see the old lady first? Okay, only about 4 of you. How many see the young woman first? And the young woman, of course, is looking away from you, and this is a collar. The young woman, this is a choker or a chain around her neck. A chain, that's a good word to use, isn't it? And that's her ear. But if it's an old woman, she's got the biggest nose in the history of the world and a chin to match. And this is her mouth line for those who hadn't seen it. Now, in intercultural comm, they will say to you at times, it's all relative. And I say, no, it's not. Pull back from the picture. And then you can see whether this is an old woman or a young woman.